This is from a game between Korchnoi and Yusupov, and then black had just played rook a8. His idea was to play rook a1, and he thought the white's pieces would suddenly have to start passively retreating to defend his bishop. But what Yusupov had underestimated, and admitted that he underestimated, indeed this is the wrong strategy, and black is much worse now, is that white has this idea of king f1, rook a1, which is also inaccurate, king e2, and the king is perfectly safe on e2. The bishop's coming to b4 next, and there's just no way to attack the king. The rook can't help, all the squares are controlled, none of the opponent's pieces are actually able to approach the king, and so white would then be just active for free, and this rook is completely out of play. Korchnoi was one of the players who was very bold with his king, as he was a very concrete player, very good with defense, and he would not only make assumptions from generalities, he would calculate the variations, and of course that is how modern chess should be played.
So in this position from the Petrov, something you really want to do is activate your pieces. Right now, white has a really strong diagonal with the d3 bishop attacking black's king. The most obvious move would be queen to c2. However, after bishop takes f6, we can't really take back and call our position good. Our pawns are very weak. And if we try to take on h7, well, we are losing to tactics. After king to h8, g takes f3, g6, our bishop is trapped, and we can't try to claim 3 pawns as compensation, because after bishop takes, f takes, queen takes g6, rook g8 pins our queen, and we are losing. So with all of our pieces mainly tied up here, we have to find a way to get this knight out of the pin and activate. Well, how do we do that? We postulate the king. With g3, we are actually getting rid of the pawn defender, making room for the stronger king on g2.
We want to protect our pawn structure. And the king is safe on f3 if they capture because they have no lights for bishop to attack us anymore, and all of our pieces are more active.
Exactly. After a move like queen to d7, king g2, our king is the perfect defender, defending both f3 and h3 from potential attack. After rook fe8, queen c2, bishop takes f3, we gladly take with the king. And now if something like queen takes h3, we have rook h1 with a decisive attack on black's king. And after a simple move like g6, we happily move the king back to g2 with a wonderful position.
We would have the bishop pair and better chances. And white can play other things in the starting position. Something like g4, though, is weakening. We don't want to do that too soon. And if we play something like rook e1, then after queen d7, both g3 and g4 become riskier. And white would be a little bit better, but mainline theory is g3 for a reason, improving the king. Indeed, the king would be safe on f3 if they exchange, and we would prepare to activate our pieces. Strong players should know their classics, and Gelfand is one of these players who's classically trained. He's playing white in an anti-Moscow gambit against a grandmaster, and he didn't reach this position, but was calculating it. A few moves earlier, he was thinking about whether to go for this position as white. He just played rook a1, and decided that this would not be strong in view of the king postulate king a7. He thought that this would be losing the thread, and he had remembered the Kasparov versus Petrosian game before and decided to go for something else where he would have a stronger attack. Such king walks, such king advances are very thematic and are used by grandmasters in modern chess. Young players often feel like they're tactically invincible. Judith Polgar had this problem, and she admitted in her book. And Garry Kasparov, at age 18, not yet world champion, but very close, was playing white against Petrosian. And yeah, Kasparov thought very highly of this game. He said that if it weren't for this loss and another loss against Petrosian, he might never have become world champion, and it really helped him understand chess better. But in this position, white is attacking. Rook takes b5 is a threat, and it's probably with checkmate. Coming soon, there's all this pressure on the A and B files, and white's pieces are very active. So we'd love to take on d6, but then there's these forks, not to mention maybe rook takes b5 checkmate, so the king is obviously not very well placed here. We need to improve the king. We need to make the king safer, and what better way to make the king safer than the thematic king postulate advancing into closer to the opponent's pieces. Kasparov was so shocked in this position that he immediately blundered and lost. Admittedly, it's not so easy to play white. There's a threat of taking the knight, there's a threat of taking the bishop, and the king is much safer here now that it's not on the same file as the opponent's pieces, even though it's closer to the center of the board. So in this position, white played rook ba3 and went on to lose. Through a series of tactics, white is able to hold the draw. And these are not simple to see. These moves are all forced by white. And in this position, white's still having to play forcing moves. Bishop takes d5, it wins back a piece. Rook takes b7, bishop takes b7, and queen b8, or some other similar move, is about equal, though I still like black's chances. Instead, Kasparov played rook ba3 and ended up losing a piece, and black played the thematic king takes c5, and Garry Kasparov resigned. In this position, black has a material advantage, but his king is on g6. And there's the bishop on f5 is a weakness, and white is threatening h5 check, winning the bishop, and also checkmating very soon. So black, if he moves his bishop out of the way, then h5 check will force mate. For instance, after king takes h5, queen takes f7 check, king takes h6. There's multiple force mates, for instance, rook h2 and rook h5. So black should not go for this. Defending the bishop is not much of an option because of queen g5 checkmate, but also h5 is just a really dangerous attacking idea. So how can we possibly defend it?
Well, I know that from a lot of my studies earlier. I learned that you have things like the knight plug, the bishop plug, and sometimes the rook plug. But something that's not very common is the king plug.
Well, here we have the thematic king plug, and we blockaded the pawn, prevented the opponent's idea, and hung our bishop with check.
I don't care about that bishop.
Yeah,
Pawn's blocked.
yeah, we don't care, but it's okay because we'll take their bishop. So, well, that's safe, and black has a material advantage here, and white will have only one attacker, the queen. So we're surrounded by pawns in our own pieces, so we're totally safe if they do that. So maybe they'll try to get fancy. They have ideas like rook takes g7. Maybe they'll think our rook is bishop g7. They might think that our rook is a target. So they're threatening queen h6 mate, so we need to take. And they go for this tactical sequence. And now knight e4. They would have ideas like knight f6. They would have ideas like queen f4. I think their main idea would be knight f6, knight g4. So black should play g6. Since the king blockade has been removed, h5 is very dangerous, and so all of white's pieces are surrounding the king, and so we play rook g6 in order to prepare to castle by hand with king g7, king h8.
Now, if they check us on f4 with the queen, once again, no fear, king back to h5.
We do the thematic king plug, of course, and white's forced to give the perpetual. So if we play king g7, we're going to lose to a decisive attack after h5. So rook g6, and white should play h5, attacking the rook. So we play rook g5, hanging the rook, of course.
Yeah, but we're at material, so we can afford to do that.
Yeah, we're protected, and exchanging would be helpful. This is a powerful attacker. So white should not take that. Black would be more than fine. So queen takes f7, and in this position, we're in quite a lot of trouble unless you realize that you don't have only one rook, you actually have two.
And you think in this position that black is on the offense. No, I think black is on the attack.
Rook a7, of course. After doing the king plug, hanging our other rook, what do? We hang our rook, and we don't even have any immediate threats. But why does this work? Well, first of all, the white queen is no longer in the attacking zone. Second of all, the white king is also pretty exposed, and there's this passed pawn paralyzing the white rook.
For a brief moment, it's as if we're up a queen.
So we're going to take advantage now with rook e1, and now we're threatening the knight. If the knight retreats, we're going to have a winning attack because of queen e8, preparing to take the h5 pawn with checkmate. So white shouldn't do this. He should play knight takes c5, trying to clear the 6th rank to attack the king. These long moves need to be prepared sometimes. So we take that. And probably white should take on a6, and this is maybe an equal position, or a better position for black, but white can could probably defend if he's accurate. The queen defending on the diagonal is useful, and white would have a passed pawn. Of course, black has a passed pawn too, and it's very active, especially with his king. So queen takes c5, though, it would be inferior. After rook e1 check, king h2, queen e8, we're again threatening queen h5, so white needs to exchange the queens. And in this rook endgame, black is the one playing for a win because of his passed pawn and his king activity. In this position, both sides' kings are exposed, but white has more active pieces. Black has a material advantage, though, with some strong passed pawns, so white needs to play urgently. There's moves like, you can try to win the queen with rook d7, takes, and play against the exposed king. Maybe you'll get a perpetual check, but white's the one who would have to try to prove that, as black would have a material advantage. So we don't really want to do that. We would love to activate our queen with something like queen h4 or queen e4, preparing to, for instance, queen e4 would play rook d7, and we're going to win the rook, or it would prepare queen h7 with rook d7 check and checkmate coming soon. But queen e4 would allow rook f1 checkmate because the queen is controlling this diagonal. So what are we to do in these situations? Our king is clearly not well placed.
Exactly. In situations like this, I think you need to postulate the king.
We play king g1, preventing rook f1 check. And now we're prepared to include our queen in the attack. Such moves, improving the king before attacking, are more common in calm situations, well, relatively calm, some Sicilians and many others, and it's a classic strategy used by Kasparov.
Something I want to note about the position is, though it's not a true Zugzwang, it's almost Zugzwang. Almost all of Black's moves end up hurting him in some way. For example, d3, probably the most obvious move, fails to queen to h4. Now that the pawn is not in the way, we are able to activate and postulate the queen to h4 with a decisive attack.
There are other wins, but we do have this extra option. So let's continue the line. King c8. There's multiple wins, and yes, queen a4 is one of them, but let's look at queen e4. King c. I'm looking at this because it involves the classic king postulate. And after queen takes h5, you find that the king is actually safe on g3. Black is not able to attack from the diagonal or from the file. And so it's being exposed is not relevant here. So queen d5, rook c7 check, king d8, queen h4.
And now he has to block with the queen, and we're winning.
Yes, I would like to point out that here after this would be winning. Okay, there's so many wins here. It's not even worth going through all of them.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say they play c2 check. Well, now we would have queen a5. But it's not literally a zugzwang because we're going to be winning after queen e4 or queen h4. So how should Black defend this? There's only one way. Queen f4 controls both of these squares. But now the queen is no longer controlling the d7 square, so white is able to get better circumstances of the rook d7 idea. For example, rook bd7 check. Black cannot play king e8 because of checkmate in two ways, so he plays king c8. And now we have rook c7 check. We have decoyed the king to the c8 square, allowing us to play queen takes e6 and get better circumstances. So Black is forced to capture with the queen. If he moves here, then we're going to play queen b1, checkmating. King d8 would allow rook d7 check, checkmating. So they have to take it. Then we give the check and a useful in-between move, king b8, rook takes c7, and now we start taking all the pawns with check. For example, something like this. There's multiple ways we can do this. And Black is not able to defend his pawn. Something like rook h8 takes, and rook h8 takes, and the material is equal, but their king is exposed, and we have the potential to make a pass pawn later. White has a significant advantage, although it's not yet clear if this is decisive.
So with the king postulate, we went from a position where we're barely holding on to a position where we are playing for the win. So here we have quite a dynamic position where many pieces are hanging and pawns are close to promotion. Right now, as whites, we are attacking the d6 rook. But if we are to take this rook, Black takes our rook with checkmate. So before we do any ideas like that, first have to protect our rook, right? Well, the rook on d1, most obvious way to protect it is to move it away. However, after a move like rook a1, Black's rook can both attack us and defend itself by going rook to f6. Now the attack on our king is going to be too much to handle, so this is not an option. The same thing with rook to e1. Black could do things like d2, but much more precise is rook f6, still attacking the king, and it's too much for us to handle.
We also don't want to play something like king e1 because of queen e2 checkmate.
Exactly. So it really looks like there's no way for us to defend our rook, so what if we try to go on the attack? Well, how about a move like f4 check? Well, unfortunately, Black has learned from the king postulate and is going to start walking his king onto our side of the board. After king to h4, queen takes d6, we will now have a perpetual. After queen to d1, king f2, queen d2 check, king g1, Black simply goes queen e1, and we'll have queen to c3, back to e1, back and forth. It is important to note that Black cannot attempt to push the d2 pawn because there will be checkmate. So he's forced to take a perpetual. Now, some people might take a perpetual here, those who haven't learned about the prophylactic king postulate. What if first, instead of taking the rook, we go queen to h6 check? Well, Black has king to g3, and if we check him again, we're actually going to be losing now after king to h2, because Black's king is not actually a weakness, it is one of Black's strongest attackers.
Our rook is under attack, and Black's pawn will be promoting soon. We're not attacking the rook anymore.
Exactly. So we have to think, how can we defend our rook, but also try to attack the opponent? Well, you can't actually do that, but you can certainly use the best attacker right now, the king.
Sure, and when we can play king g1 here.
Mm-hmm.
And It prepares these ideas because now our king will not be in danger and can be included in the attack with king h2 or king g3 if needed, but also f4 check will come with greater power.
Exactly. And remember that before, the way black escaped was through king h4 to g3. Well, if our king is on h2 and we go f4, he is in immediate danger of checkmate. Now, queen takes d1, king h2. There's a threat of promotion after c7, so black has to take this pawn. Queen takes f7. We are threatening a lot here, such as a checkmating pattern after queen f4.
Queen f4, king h5, g4, king h4, queen h6 checkmate. This is actually this is a decisive attack for white down a rook.
Yeah.
And was played in an elite grandmaster game in the European Championship some years ago.
If rook to f6, we go f4 check. And black now cannot survive if he goes like king f5, because we have queen d5 check, which will be winning.
Checkmate, yes.
Yeah. So black has to give up the rook. And right now, if you were to calculate this line, this can be a place that allows you to realize that something like king h2 is viable, because we've won back the rook. However, we're not just winning back the rook. This is actually forced checkmate. After queen to e2, queen f8 check, king h5, queen g7, h6, queen e5. We are now getting that mating pattern we had before, because our king is on h2, protecting the g3 square. After queen h4, queen f6, king h5, we go f5, now breaking apart the pawns that are defending black's king. G takes f5, queen takes f5, king h4, queen g6, and we will soon following up with mate.
Yes, there are other ways that white can mate. Here, if black plays queen h5, there's queen g3, checkmate. In other continuations, there would be queen takes h6, checkmate. And if they would play h5, there's queen f6. And there were other ways to win. This was a game played in the 2015 European Championships. Elyunov was playing black, and he was 2,700. These grandmasters really know how to postulate the king.
They always do.
In this position, the black queen is on the same diagonal as the white king, and black is threatening rook takes g4, takes g4, and queen takes e4 check with the decisive attack. White has to find a way to respond to this, and something like rook h4 would be passive. White would only be playing with two pieces, and black is getting a lot of counterplay. The black king is also exposed, especially with this passed pawn and the ability to take here and queen h6, so we're going to want the rook to be active at some point soon. Therefore, we should consider other ways to defend the pawn. Defending with the queen would also be passive and would hang the g7 bishop, but why not consider the king? The king is actually safer on g3 because it's not on the same diagonal as the queen, but now we have the option of meeting rook takes g4 with king takes g4, which is perfectly fine even though it's further along the board because the opponent's pieces are not nearby and it's actually much safer there.